It was a quiet night in New York City when the world first laid eyes on The Reckoning. Streaming platforms buzzed with activity, but no one was truly prepared for the magnitude of what they were about to witness. The documentary, produced and narrated by 50 Cent himself, didn't just reveal truths, it detonated them. In living rooms, apartments, and offices across the globe, viewers were glued to their screens, eyes wide, hearts racing, unable to turn away. The first 10 minutes alone were enough to stop conversation in its tracks. Clips of private conversations, hidden meetings, and carefully pieced together timelines were presented with surgical precision, and every revelation landed like a hammer blow. It wasn't entertainment, it was indictment. Social media exploded instantly. Twitter was ablaze. Instagram stories replayed clips at lightning speed. Hashtags like The Reckoning, #Diddy exposed, and #justice for victims began trending worldwide within hours. Reaction videos piled up by the thousands. Influencers, celebrities, and ordinary fans alike dissected every frame, every facial expression, every gesture. Comment sections overflowed with disbelief, anger, and in some corners, a twisted sense of vindication. The magnitude of the content left people questioning everything they thought they knew about Diddy. Once untouchable, now humanized in the most harrowing of ways, the world had begun to judge him, and the judgment was swift and merciless. It wasn't long before mainstream media outlets picked up the story. Headlines screamed across the internet, Diddy's dark secrets exposed in 50 Cent's explosive documentary. Public outcry forces legal review. The untouchable face accountability. Every article, every news clip further fanned the flames. The public wasn't just consuming content, they were building a case in real time. Forums buzzed with theorists reconstructing timelines. YouTube breakdowns analyzed hidden interactions and cross-referenced them with past interviews. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to discussing the implications, dissecting body language, and speculating on legal consequences. The documentary's reach was unprecedented, and the ripple effects couldn't be contained. Legal experts began commenting publicly, cautiously, almost nervously, about what this could mean for ongoing investigations. Conversations once whispered in private offices were now happening online, in plain view, and for the first time, there was a sense that the law itself could no longer remain indifferent. For Diddy, the impact was immediate. Social media mentions turned from neutral to accusatory within hours. Followers dropped, endorsements vanished, and long-standing alliances began to fray. Friends who had once stood silently by his side began distancing themselves publicly, unsure if remaining loyal would implicate them as well. The persona of the untouchable mogul, once meticulously crafted over decades, began to crack under the glaring lights of exposure. The weight of public scrutiny was relentless. No longer could he rely on image management or PR teams to control the narrative. Every move was now under a microscope, every post, every statement analyzed, critiqued, and compared against the revelations in The Reckoning. In parallel, the legal world began to stir. Cassie's legal team, long waiting for a break, saw in the documentary an unprecedented opportunity. Every time-stamped interaction, every leaked call, every visual cue was evidence waiting to be leveraged. For the first time, they weren't chasing rumors. They had concrete, widely disseminated proof that could not be easily dismissed. In private, they began strategizing late into the night, reviewing footage, cross-referencing statements, and preparing for what they sensed would be a historic legal push. The world was no longer just watching. Society, law, and public opinion were converging. And in the eye of the storm was Diddy, once untouchable, now forced to confront a reality he could not control. The world had become a courtroom, and the jury was unforgiving. The courtroom had never felt so heavy. Reports of The Reckoning had reached the highest echelons of the judicial system, and now a judge known for his unwavering integrity was being forced to confront the storm that 50 Cent had unleashed. Judge Hamilton, a man whose decisions had shaped high-profile cases for decades, had spent the morning reviewing what the public had already seen. Clips, audio recordings, and witness statements compiled meticulously in the documentary. Every frame, Every word, every pause carried weight. The judge had faced tough cases before, organized crime, embezzlement, even murder. But nothing like this. Nothing where the court of public opinion and the court of law collided so violently. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, reviewing transcripts and video stills. He knew the pressure wasn't just coming from within the legal system. Millions were watching. Every action he took or didn't take would be dissected, debated, and immortalized online. The media presence outside the courthouse was like a living, breathing entity. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for space, and microphones hovered over anyone brave enough to speak. But inside, it was quiet, tense, almost suffocating. Lawyers filed motions that would normally take weeks to surface. Each submission was backed by clips from the reckoning, cross-referenced with past court records, phone logs, and witness affidavits. The evidence was overwhelming, and its authenticity nearly impossible to dispute. The public was not just aware of Diddy's actions, they had virtually participated in the investigation themselves, uncovering inconsistencies, connecting dots, and questioning motives. And now, the judge had to make a decision that could change everything. For Diddy, this was a nightmare unfolding in real time. His team of top attorneys scrambled to contain the fallout, but every attempt to discredit the documentary seemed futile. The footage was so thorough, so detailed, that even seasoned lawyers struggled to find a single misstep. Private meetings in darkened offices became high-stakes strategy sessions. Calls were made, alliances tested, and every possible defense weighed, but the pressure was unrelenting. On the streets, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Fans turned critics overnight. Radio shows debated whether Diddy could escape legal consequences. Late-night television treated the unfolding drama as the biggest cultural moment of the year. The public frenzy was relentless, but within the courthouse, the weight of actual law demanded precision, not speculation. Judge Hamilton summoned Diddy to appear in a special hearing, one that would be broadcast live to ensure transparency. Security was tightened to an unprecedented level. Barricades lined the streets. Helicopters hovered, capturing the spectacle from above. Inside, the courtroom was filled with a sense of inevitability. Everyone understood that this wasn't just another high-profile case. This was a reckoning, literal, public, and judicial. When Diddy finally entered the room, there was a hush. He moved with the same confidence that had made him untouchable, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every eye followed him, every whisper counted, and every glance from the judge felt like a verdict in itself. Judge Hamilton called the hearing to order, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of responsibility. He detailed the gravity of the evidence presented, acknowledging the documentary's impact not just on public perception, but on legal proceedings. The room seemed to shrink under the intensity of his words. Diddy's legal team attempted to interject, to argue procedural technicalities, but the judge was unshaken. He understood the broader implications. He understood the necessity of justice, untainted by celebrity or influence. The tension was nearly unbearable. Every second felt stretched, every motion examined. Witnesses, previously hesitant to speak, now came forward with renewed courage, emboldened by the documentary's revelations. Their testimonies painted a picture too vivid to ignore. And as the hours passed, it became clear. The judge was preparing to make a decision that would reverberate across the globe. This was no longer just about one man, one case, or even one documentary. It was a statement, a declaration that accountability, no matter how hidden or celebrated, could not be denied. When the final moment arrived, the judge leaned forward, eyes piercing, voice resonant. Every camera, every microphone, every soul in that room awaited the words that would define history. And in that instant, the world held its breath. The room was electric with anticipation. Every eye in the courtroom followed Diddy's every move, the weight of history pressing down like a physical force. The judge's gavel struck the desk, reverberating through the chamber, signaling that proceedings would continue. But it was more than a courtroom session now. It was a spectacle, a cultural and legal earthquake that had the world watching. Diddy, once untouchable, sat rigidly, his face betraying the slightest flicker of unease. The documentary The Reckoning had exposed layers of deception, manipulation, and illegal activity so meticulously documented that even his closest allies struggled to defend him. The judge's voice cut through the tension, deliberate and unflinching. "Mr. Combs," he said using Diddy's legal name, "the evidence presented, corroborated, and verified leaves no room for ambiguity. Your actions, as revealed in the documentary and supported by witness testimony, demonstrate a pattern of behavior incompatible with the law and public trust." The courtroom seemed to inhale as the weight of the words settled. Diddy's attorneys exchanged frantic glances, their previous confidence eroding under the inexorable tide of truth. Calls had been made, strategies revised, emergency motions drafted, but nothing could erase what had been laid bare before the world. Outside, the public reaction was instantaneous. Social media exploded. News outlets interrupted programming. Hashtags trended worldwide. Every discussion a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a sense of vindication. The narrative had shifted. Diddy was no longer untouchable. He was vulnerable, exposed, and facing consequences the public demanded. Inside, the atmosphere was no less charged. Witness after witness took the stand, each account building a damning mosaic of misdeeds. Their testimonies were precise, corroborated by dates, phone logs, and documents included in the documentary's compilation. The judge listened intently, occasionally pausing to consult notes or review exhibits. There was no rush, no theatrics, just the slow, methodical march of justice. Diddy's demeanor shifted subtly. His confidence, a hallmark of his persona, was eroding. Subtle gestures betrayed tension, a clenched jaw, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes, fingers tapping impatiently against the armrest. Each revelation in the courtroom added weight to the growing sense of inevitability. The documentary had not just told a story, it had become an instrument of accountability, a catalyst that forced truths long hidden into the light. The lawyers' attempts to challenge the evidence became increasingly desperate. They questioned methodologies, timelines, even the motives of the witnesses. But every objection seemed to falter against the unrelenting clarity of the facts. The judge, unshaken, maintained focus. His commitment was to the law, to the victims, and to the principles of justice that could not bend to fame or fortune. Every detail of the documentary was dissected in open court, and the patterns emerged clearly. Actions that had once seemed isolated or ambiguous were revealed as part of a larger, orchestrated sequence of manipulation and crime. And the public watched. The courtroom became a theater of accountability, a rare intersection of celebrity culture and judicial process where no one, no matter how powerful, could escape scrutiny. As the proceedings continued, Diddy's aura of invincibility began to crumble. The judge, in a moment of rare candor, addressed the gravity of the situation. "This is not merely about celebrity or influence," he said. "This is about accountability. This is about sending a message that no one is above the law." The words hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Security personnel remained vigilant, sensing the tension that extended beyond the courtroom walls. Media crews captured every reaction, every subtle exchange, broadcasting them to a world captivated by the unfolding drama. And as the day wore on, the realization dawned, not just on Diddy, but on everyone in that room, that a turning point had been reached. The fall from grace had begun, and the trajectory was unalterable. This was no longer speculation. This was history in the making. The reckoning was no longer theoretical. It had arrived. And in the silence that followed the judge's pronouncement, one thing became clear. The world would never view Diddy or celebrity power in the same way again. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, thick enough to be felt on the skin. Every eye was locked on the proceedings, every ear straining for the next revelation. The momentum from Part 3 had shifted. What had started as speculation, whispers in tabloids and social media chatter, had transformed into an undeniable legal reality. Diddy, once the picture of invincibility, now sat on the edge of the seat, his posture tight, hands clasped, eyes darting with measured anxiety. The judge, unyielding and composed, motioned to the prosecution to present the next segment of evidence. And it was here that the Reckoning documentary became the linchpin of the entire case. The footage was relentless. Layers of correspondence, covert recordings, and testimonies meticulously compiled to demonstrate a pattern of manipulation, coercion, and criminal enterprise. The courtroom projector flickered to life, casting scenes of meetings, intercepted communications, and painstakingly documented transactions onto the screen. Witnesses, once shielded by anonymity, stepped forward under oath. Each recounted details that corroborated the documentary's timeline, creating a web of facts that was impossible to dismantle. The audience could feel the gravity of each statement. Journalists leaned forward, live feeds capturing every expression, every subtle change in demeanor. Social media users were glued to streams and updates, sharing clips, hashtags, and commentary. The cultural pulse had shifted. Diddy's image as untouchable mogul, master of influence, was unraveling before a global audience. In the courtroom, lawyers scrambled to find cracks in the evidence, to poke holes in the narrative presented. But the facts were stubborn, unyielding. Dates, times communications, financial records, they all pointed toward a calculated, systematic engagement in illegal activity. The defense tried to introduce character witnesses, influential allies who spoke of Diddy's contributions to the industry, philanthropy, and personal generosity. But the judge, weighing the facts against the law, remained unimpressed. This court recognizes past accomplishments, he said firmly, but they cannot negate the documented pattern of behavior presented here. The subtle power dynamics were shifting. Even those who had once benefited from Diddy's reach began to reassess, some whispering apologies under their breath, others openly distancing themselves. The courtroom had become a theater of accountability, where fame and fortune held no sway against truth and justice. Every revelation from the documentary hit like a calculated strike. Communications that once seemed innocuous were revealed as evidence of orchestration, influence peddling, and coercion. Bank records traced payments, transfers, and transactions that painted a clearer picture of complicity and intent. And as the prosecution methodically laid out the evidence, a transformation occurred. The world outside the courtroom, captivated by the broadcast and social media updates, began to internalize the implications. This was more than a case, it was a reckoning for celebrity culture, a cautionary tale of how power, when unchecked, could collide with the inexorable force of law. Diddy's body language spoke volumes. Hands clenched, jaw tight, eyes scanning for reassurance that wasn't coming. The protective shield of fame had been pierced. The armor of influence was crumbling. Every exhibit, every testimony reinforced the reality he could no longer deny. The consequences of his actions were closing in. The judge, a figure of stoic authority, summarized the impact of the documentary's revelations. "This is a case where evidence leaves no ambiguity," he said, voice steady but commanding. "Patterns of deception, manipulation, and criminal conduct have been laid bare. The law is clear, and the responsibility to uphold it is unavoidable." As the courtroom absorbed the gravity of these words, the implications rippled far beyond those walls. Media coverage intensified, interviews with legal experts dissected the unfolding case, and public opinion solidified. Diddy's empire, once seemingly untouchable, was under scrutiny, and the momentum toward judgment was irreversible. The tension, now electric and nearly unbearable, set the stage for the coming verdict. Every eye, every mind, every heartbeat in the courtroom waited for the next move, the next pronouncement that would seal the trajectory of a figure who had once seemed above consequence. The narrative had shifted irreversibly. Diddy, the symbol of dominance, influence, and invincibility, was now facing the full weight of accountability, and there was no escape from the truth that the reckoning had so meticulously illuminated. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses on the chest and turns the air heavy. Every eye remained fixed on the judge, who now held the gavel with a gravity that seemed to echo through every corner of the room. Diddy sat motionless, his usual charisma and bravado replaced by a tense rigidity, fingers intertwined so tightly they threatened to whiten. Months of anticipation, weeks of testimony, and hours of documentary footage had led to this moment. The weight of the evidence from the reckoning had not only dismantled Diddy's carefully curated public image, but had also exposed the depth of influence, manipulation, and criminal intent that could no longer be ignored. The prosecution had laid out its case with unrelenting precision. Each piece of footage, each corroborating witness, each financial record had built a narrative so compelling, so irrefutable, that even the most ardent supporters could not deny its force. The air was electric, charged with anticipation, as the judge began to speak. This court has carefully reviewed all evidence, listened to all testimonies, and considered the arguments presented by both sides. His voice echoed, steady, unwavering. The patterns of conduct established by the prosecution demonstrate a clear and intentional engagement in activities that violate the law, and no personal stature, wealth, or influence can mitigate responsibility under the justice system. Diddy's lips pressed together, eyes darting briefly toward his defense team, searching for some flicker of reprieve that would not come. The world outside was already reacting, social media platforms ablaze with commentary, analysis, and shock. Fans, journalists, and casual observers alike tried to reconcile the man they had idolized with the reality now painted by evidence. The judge continued, detailing each element of criminal conduct. Each act that tied Diddy to manipulations that were previously hidden from public view. The documentary had not only informed the court, but had shifted public consciousness. What had once been entertainment speculation was now undeniable legal reality. Considering the evidence, the testimonies, and the unambiguous documentation presented, the judge intoned, this court finds the defendant guilty of all charges as laid out in the indictment. The law must be upheld and justice cannot be delayed. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Journalists whispered into microphones, live feeds capturing stunned expressions, and legal analysts raised again immediate breakdowns of the verdict's implications. For Diddy, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. Security personnel subtly moved to the defendant's side as he was formally processed, the reality of incarceration setting in. The public, glued to screens across the world, watched a narrative they thought they knew transform in front of their eyes. The mogul who had once seemed untouchable, whose influence spanned industries and borders, now faced the stark reality of confinement. And yet, amidst the gravity, there was a strange sense of resolution. The reckoning had delivered not just evidence, but a reckoning, a confrontation with accountability that transcended fame. Legal experts noted that this case would set a precedent, demonstrating the power of thorough investigative work, meticulous documentation, and the role of media in amplifying justice. Every detail from the documentary had mattered, from secret recordings to financial tracking, each piece of thread woven into a tapestry too complex for Diddy's influence to unravel. As he was led away, the courtroom remained silent, witnesses and jurors absorbing the enormity of what had just transpired. Outside, fans and critics alike debated, dissected, and reflected, the verdict igniting discussions on morality, power, and the consequences of unchecked influence. The reckoning had done more than expose wrongdoing. It had reshaped cultural perception, challenged assumptions, and reaffirmed that no one, regardless of wealth or status, is above the law. In those final moments, as the gavel fell one last time, the story reached its climax. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. And the world would remember not only the verdict, but the relentless pursuit of truth that made it possible. Diddy's empire, once thought invincible, had been forced to confront an undeniable truth. Accountability waits for no one, and the consequences of past actions have a way of catching up, even to the most powerful.